Any, I'm looking at Mr. Harlan and Councillor O'Neill Stevens. Is there anything they wish to bring up on page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, and page 10? So someone move the electronic record. Thank you, Councillor O'Neill Stevens. Someone to second. Thank you, Mr. Harlan. Any discussion, debate? There being none, I'll put it. Those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, carried. Next item on the agenda is the Waka Kotahi NZTA agency update. Is it Mr. Higgs speaking?
We're doing a tag team.
Thanks, Mr. Harlan.
Well, I guess we'll take the report as read, but just to highlight a couple of things. The financial position for the agency was affected by people travelling less during the lockdown period. So within the current 18-21 National Land Transport Program period, clearly we had less cash in the system, but we still have commitments to be met. So we've been given authority to borrow $425 million from the COVID fund to be repaid over the next 7 years. In addition to that, there's a $600 million top-up from that fund to cover the revenue reduction, and also a further borrowing facility should we need it to get us through. So, you know, the current programs will continue. You'll be aware we've been providing financial support for public transport, so it's been free, to ensure that that essential services has been maintained. There's been delays and therefore extra costs to do with various projects that we look after and fund. So essentially that's the financial position to support the agency going forward.
Councillor Eager.
Just in relation to probably in particular the borrowing, but so will this mean less money going forward, and so therefore this will impact on the what's able to be funded over that 7-year period? How is that to be repaid?
Well, we have to repay it out of the expected revenues then. So depending what happens post-COVID, then that could have that impact on our program. However, there is a cash grant in there for the 2021, which is the $600 million, which my understanding is that doesn't have to be repaid. So there's the 425 in the current financial year, an additional loan facility 300 should we need to for the current period. But, well, we've got Arataki on the agenda later on, but we have done a bit of modelling around the whole impact of COVID. It will take up to a decade before business as usual is returned. Different regions are affected. If you've got a high exposure to foreign tourists and immigration, then you're going to have a bigger impact on your local economy and therefore revenue generation than other regions. The Nelson, so top of the South region, it's affected in a similar way to the most of rest of New Zealand, whereas places like Queenstown, which have a greater exposure to foreign tourism, have been hit a lot harder. The Treasury modelled 4 different scenarios, and the fourth one was where New Zealand was in reasonable shape, but there were different impacts across the globe in terms of rates of recovery and therefore ability to trade, and that appears to be what's happening. And what that means is it's incredibly uncertain for all of us. But I guess the good news is there are those financial provisions in place. We won't run out of cash, but we'll have to size our program accordingly. Steve, do you want to talk about the NLTP update?
So just very quickly, the first item there is the Waka Kotahi investment proposal. So the investment proposal, which we used to call the TAPE, the Transport Agency's investment proposal, that has not been released at this stage, and it has been delayed. I have indicated in this paper that we're indicating at the moment a post-election date for it to be released, but that's not certain at this stage. So we're hoping it will be earlier than that. It's recognised that it will have a flow-on effect in terms of making, the timing of that, and then obviously the timing of trying to get the regional land transport plans pulled together as well. So We're working very closely with the Transport Special Interest Group around those timeframes and seeing how we can actually work with that. We've probably got a window of around about a month or so. What I haven't put in this report, though, is the board is meeting on the 18th of September. As part of that meeting, there will be a consideration by the board as to whether it may be able to release that information earlier or not. But at this stage, I just have to work on the assumptions that I know at this stage going forward. In terms of the bullet points at the bottom there, I just wanted to highlight that in particular, the last bullet point where we've talked about RLT submission dates to NZTA. So that decision has been made. It has now been pushed out to June 30th next year, 2021. And a final NLTP will be in August as opposed to June. So essentially those two dates have been pushed out by 2 months. One further point I would make too is that in the normal cycle of pulling together a National Land Transport Plan, we will work through the continuous activities first. So that's your maintenance operations, your roading, your essentially the work that is actually needed to keep your levels of service going. So your business as usual. During the period of the next 2 months, it's always been planned that we would be going through a moderation process. That hasn't changed, so we're still working on that. I think what we will need to try and provide the guidance on will be the investment. So the investment and the improvement activities. So that's your programs, your improvement programs for the next 3 years or so. Just moving down. So I'll just stop there, just in case there's any questions.
I've just got one.
Clarification.
I didn't see the dates, but is the date for the NLTP, is that still remain fixed? Did that shift?
So the date for the NLTP has moved from June through to August. So it's moved by 2 months.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Sorry, and you may have explained this. So exactly how does that work with our LTPs?
So the LTPs are running their own cycle. It's always been a bit of a chicken and egg in terms of what comes first, whether it's the regional land transport plans or the LCPs. During a normal program, you would be running your RLTPs first, so you'd understand what.
Sorry, long-term plan.
So you're running your RLTPs often ahead of your long-term plan.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, but because of the timing, now it's essentially being pushed out a little bit further. The processes of running your long-term plan and your regional land transport plans will be much closer together.
I think in practice, your long-term plan will be, you'll have to make assumptions about how your RLTP lands and how it might be received. You won't have that advice for the capital program. As I understand it, Steve, we're still endeavouring to give early signals around the maintenance and operations and so on to assist in your planning. But that first year of your LTP is going to be challenging because you won't get the advice from us till after you've had to strike that plan and meet your rating year starting 2021, July 2021.
But isn't it bigger than that? Because I mean, if there is any key changes between what we have to legally sign off in our LTP by 30 June and what you put forward, we could end up having to do a full variation to our long-term plan, which, is generally hundreds of thousands of dollars per council.
Unfortunately, you're right. The reason for the delay is because of the uncertainties that COVID have put in the system, both, as I mentioned, on the income side, but also on the agency side. In addition to that, there's the New Zealand Upgrade Program and the stimulus program, which impacts on what may be funded through some of that could have been funded in our program. So we're trying to get the best program together, and that's taking longer than we expected. In addition to that, of course, there's an election which will bring further uncertainty depending on what happens. So it is difficult for yourselves, and it's difficult for us. And unfortunately, we were there three years ago.
Probably a pity all the councils don't get a 2-month extension as well then.
Could I just add a little bit more? It's not quite as black and white as saying these are the dates that we're going to work to, and there's a lot of conversations that occur between officers, between NZTA and the council. So as we know, we'll have information, we will be providing that. But just in terms of information that we're getting from the councils in terms of what they're intending to put up to NZTA, we get that first indication in the next month or so. We then have a look at it. We will then be providing a feedback to the councils by the end of October. So by the end of October, in terms of the continuous programs, you'll have a reasonably good understanding about where NZTA is sort of starting to position itself. Once we start moving into early 2021, we start going out to consultation. There's actually then another moderation round through that consultation period where, again, we're just testing the bids that are actually coming in and actually looking at how they're actually sitting. And, of course, at the same time, trying to track the revenue that we know is actually coming in as well. So it's not going to be as if you sort of hit, by the end of May through to June. This is what it's looking like. We will be giving some pretty good indications and signals leading up to that date. And I think the other thing to mention too is that very much part of what we want to do is make sure that we continue that close engagement with local government as well. So hopefully that might delay, help in some regard.
Yes, certainly, a good partnership approach like we've enjoyed traditionally will be very beneficial because, unfortunately, we haven't been given any leeway, which is not your fault. But, the good open communication and good partnership will help.
Yeah, I might give Mr. Laverge just to respond from the council perspective.
So through the chair, the question from the Deputy Chair is very, very pertinent. It's something that Ms. Parfitt and myself, along with NZTA, are working very closely on. We still have an LTP to deliver, and our RLTP has to align with the LTP, and that's what we're working on. I'm also working with the GAs in terms of what that means for us from January to June. Yes, and it's not looking particularly easy for us in terms of the amount of meetings and our statement of proposal. Everything has moved out. And as I said previously, when we got the new GPS, that was particularly challenging. This is turning out to be particularly challenging again. That's on the basis that there is no new government and no new GPS as it is. So I take comfort in the hope that we get an early release from the board in terms of the investment proposal, which we really need that so that they can guide us. But yes, the timeframes aren't linking up, and I can say that from January to June next year, we've probably got an RTC meeting every month until June, and it's particularly difficult.
Okay, I'll just quickly carry on. So the government policy statement that was confirmed by Cabinet on the 10th of September, but we're still waiting for an official release of the government policy. Sorry? Did I say 10th of September? Yes, the 10th of August. You're quite right. The other thing I just thought this committee may be interested in the fact that there is actually quite a lot of guidance around RLTP development that we have been putting onto our website. That guidance has actually been developed both in partnership. Well, it's been developed in partnership with ourselves and the Transport Special Interest Group as well. So this time we have tried to sort of do a joint development of guidance development. I have given you links there to have a look through that guidance as you wish, but I suppose the key things for me is that very early on, there was some guidance around the development of a regional land transport plan, what it might look like and what you might like to consider. The group that has been workshopping the regional land transport plan for the Top of the South has been following that guidance reasonably closely. The other guidance that we will talk to you about later this afternoon is the prioritisation guidance. So that's actually looking at the program, the improvement activities that are proposed for the regions, and a process for actually how you'd actually go about prioritising, which is a requirement of the regional land transport plans. I don't think there's much more I need to say on that, really. It was really just highlighting the fact that there is a lot of guidance that we're jointly developing and we're working to.
I touched on Arataki before. I mean, the essence of the message here is that you've got a very strong primary production economy. You've also got manufacturing, government services, health services, and that means the impact here in terms of loss of employment, etc., is pretty well in line with the national average, which is around minus 6.7% in the short, medium term. In terms of if you take a 10-year view, then the demand, we believe, for transport in this part of New Zealand will be pretty similar. And I think you can expect a lift in your domestic tourism over the next 2 to 3 years, because none of us are travelling overseas. You're close to some major population centres. You get an annual inrush of Cantabrians. You'll probably have more this year. Wellingtonians with the ferry connections. I suspect you're going to see a lift in domestic tourism, which may pose some local management issues in terms of parking things, but I'm sure we can work our way through that. And I think since we did the first draft, we're under version 3. So we did say we will keep Arataki up to date, and we will be continuing to keep it up to date as we move our way forwards. There are various links in there to the actual document itself in the latest version. And probably the rest of our report is operationally focused, so we'll take that as read. My understanding is that we'll be releasing the decision on the speed review and its implementation timetable for Blenheim to Nelson. That'll be post-election.
Any other questions? Yeah, I've got a comment, but I was going to follow the two issues I was going to follow you up on. Mr. Harden, was the speed review, as the feedback we're sort of getting from the community is particularly the urban section between sort of the old urban boundary is a sense of frustration with the time delay. Yeah.
Well, it's a lot of work's been done, so when it's released, we'll be moving fairly quickly.
Post-election.
Yes.
Okay. And the other one was the reseal on QE2 Drive. And I noticed the report there minor issues with the contractor. Is there anything else you can add to that?
Well, that's all we know. I mean, obviously they'll be improving the surface once they can, because it hasn't performed as expected. So exactly what they're going to do, I'm sorry, we'd have to come back to you with that, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. All right, so operation. Was there any with the I suppose the road quietening, or was it just to replace like with like?
I think it's replaced like with like in this case.
Thanks. Comment from Councillor Eager.
Sorry, comment and a question. I'll start with the comment first, just because it was one of your documents that you linked to, which was sort of just our region at a glance, but it's also just in relation to the broader comment. And you talk about Maori and Pacifica and youth being more likely to experience the greatest impacts of COVID. Can I please note women actually are experiencing 60 to 70% of job losses have been women. if you look at the industries where there were job losses, retail, hospitality, highest proportion of their workers are women, highest proportion even in the male-dominated industries that lost jobs. The proportion of jobs that were lost were part-time, and they were more likely statistically to be women again. Then also, if you look at underutilisation, again, women come into that. So I just think that's another variable that you need to take into account. With all due deference to Maori, Pacifica and youth, but women also do feature significantly, and they just, not just you guys. I raise this every time because everyone keeps missing them out. And I just wanted to ask about the Blenheim to Nelson speed review. I believe, and apologies if this is incorrect information, because I wasn't on council when this started. I believe that there was a request at some stage being able to like decouple aspects of it. So the Blenheim end was decoupled from the Nelson end. I was just wondering if that was being looked at, since I'm not quite sure how long this has gone on for, but I remember reading something in the paper that it was going to be done by Christmas, and I think that was last year.
Yes, there was a request to decouple it, and we, for various reasons, decided not to. And I did promise that we would have the speed limits reviewed and the new signs up before Christmas last year. So it's quite embarrassing to me for not being able to deliver that, although obviously in my role I don't directly do things. In terms of the timetable from here, with regard to that, I mentioned to Councillor McCurk what that is. And I've probably gone too far in terms of the information I shared with you, but it's not far away and work has been done around design, so that's good. After the election, we'll be in a position to announce what the decisions are and the implementation timetable.
By Christmas?
So
if we just keep that same phrase?
I think we can keep that same phrase. Let's see how we go.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions of, is it Whakakatai? Right. Thanks. I think the recommendation was that we just receive the report. Moved by Councillor Edgar, seconded by Councillor Neil Stevens. Oh, question, Madam Mayor.
And I just want to speak to receiving the report just very briefly. I think the uncertainty around timeframes and the implications on the LTP are very real, and I understand the reasons for them. But I think we just need to be mindful of it as a committee as we feed through our work into council's work, that we make that really clear as we start to build the LTP, that there will be significant uncertainty. And I think we need to communicate that through to the public, that while we will have to put in some placeholder projects as we go through, they're even more than normal. They shouldn't build up, expectations that they are coming in year one or, straight up, but there could be a lot of movement that's going to occur. I fully understand the challenge, and all I can say is we'll wait and see what happens with the GPS, but I'm not sure that I'm prepared for to do what we had to do the last time and try and run through changes in responding to a GPS in 3 months. That was incredibly difficult, and we certainly don't have the capacity to do that again. So hopefully we can get that in a slightly more timely way.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. No discussion or debate? Okay, I'll put it. Those in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, carried. I was meant to say just a brief chair's report, just a verbal one, just to, just got my notes here, just a note that Councillor Edgar and I attended the Regional South Island Chairs meeting via Zoom, I think it was about a week ago, with the other 7 regional South Island Regional Transport Committees, and we supported Councillor Stuart Brighton from TDC to be the chair of the forum for the term, and the collaboration charter that has also been reconfirmed with some minor amendments. So relatively positive meeting, so there's no major changes there, and we're happy to support Councillor Bryant as the chair. So with that, that's a very, very brief verbal report from the chair, so I'm happy to move. Someone to second. Thanks, Councillor Edgar. Any discussion or debate? Good. I'll put it those in favour of receiving my verbal report, say aye. Aye, against carried. Right, the Nelson Future Access Study. Update. Now we've got Makama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm happy to take the report as read, although I would like to focus on the item 4.1, the community engagement that we did in July. And I've got a few slides that I'll run through a factual summary of what we heard from the community. We undertook, as I'm sure many of you are aware, community engagement process in the month of July on the Nelson Future Access project. That focused on gaining the community's views on 3 long-term packages. They were the priority lanes, which utilising peak period clearways on both Waimea Road and State Highway 6, the 2 arterial routes in and out of town. Second package was the coastal corridor widening, which was 4 laning of State Highway 6 between Annesbrook and QE2. And the third package called the Inland Route, which was a new arterial route using the Railway Reserve in St Vincent Street. Just, I've got the control here, haven't I? Bear with me. Oh, there we go. Great. So we were very pleased with the amount of engagement we had through all of the different mediums, I guess, that we reached out to the community. We had a website that received 11,500 hits, and of that there were 4,100 unique users. We had a platform called Social Pinpoint, which enabled people to go in and put location-specific comments in relation to the packages that we had, or like or dislike comments that other people had made, and we had 1,400 individual comments or likes or dislikes on that platform. In terms of the survey that we put out, we received 1,300 survey responses back electronically through that online platform, and 502 via email or in the post. So yeah, 1,800 odd survey responses. We had 4 open days and a bespoke session for English as a second language in the Victory community. Now I'm just going to summarise what we heard in relation to the 3 long-term packages. Sorry, EJ, are you able to forward one slide forward, or am I only able to do it from here? Oh, there we go. Oh no, gone too far. Oh, we're both doing it now, aren't we? I'll put my hands down. If you can go, that's it, spot on. So these 4 pie charts in the top left is a pie chart. We asked a question around which of the long-term packages would best enable, the vision for Nelson as a smart little city. That's top left. Top right, we asked a question around which long-term package do you think would change the way you travel? And then the bottom 2 are fairly self-explanatory around sea level rise and carbon emissions. And I guess what we're seeing there in the results is there's strong support for both priority lanes and inland route package, with very minor support on that coastal corridor widening package. Obviously, the priority lanes there has a higher proportion, higher percentage than the inland route. Are you able to go forward to that next slide for me there, Alec? Great, thank you. Top left, again, similar kind of question around is the previous 4 graphs around which which long-term package would be most successful in enabling you to walk and cycle between Annesbrook and the city centre. Now, the bottom left here, the types of cyclist pie chart. What was quite interesting in this, when you drill into it, was we had 1,800 people in that order fill out the survey, and nearly 1,500 people answered this question in terms of, they said they were a cyclist of some form. So I guess that shows quite a big proportion of people that that engaged with this survey that were cyclists. The graph on the bottom right, we asked a question around, would you prefer, if we have to make a trade-off between providing for parking or providing for walking and cycling? And you can see there 77% of people said no, they prefer that we, if we have to make a trade-off, that they'd want that space for walking and cycling. We drilled into this question a wee bit more too, and we drew a 4 kilometre buffer around the CBD to understand whether that percentage would change if people live closer to the CBD than further out and therefore had to travel further. People that had to travel further, i.e. more than 4 kilometres, there was still 72% of people supported more space for walking and cycling. So it wasn't as big a change as I guess I was expecting there. Next slide, please, Alec. We asked a question around, if we were to provide an additional lane, who should use that lane? That's the top pie chart there. And 55% of respondents suggested it should be multiple users, buses, freight, and cars carrying more than 2 or 3 people. Bottom left there, again, which long-term package would be most successful in getting people to use public transport? Bottom left graph. And on the right-hand side, we asked people to rank the packages, and that graph there is a graph of the responses where the first choice was given to a particular package. So if people said, inland route's my my first choice, we haven't reflected what their second, third and fourth choice is in that graphic. That was just their first choice. Next slide, thanks, Alec. So, thank you. We asked a question to gain a bit of insight around if we have to make a trade-off, would people prefer more crossing points or shorter journeys on the arterial routes? So, that's obviously the trade-off. If we provide much better, I guess, access across our main arterials, so we're not severing communities as much by arterials, there might need to be a trade-off. So we asked this question, and you can see the response there, 72% were in favour of more crossing points. Again, we interrogated this by location, and it wasn't a massive change. It increased to 75% support for more crossings if those that lived within 4 kilometres of a CBD, so a slight increase. And then the last question we asked, has COVID or will COVID continue to affect your daily travel patterns? And that was the response we got. If we can move to the next slide, we've just got some demographic information. So we had a split male versus female that was very similar to the 2013 census results. So I guess that was pleasing that we weren't skewed there in terms of gender. Age, again, we had reasonable representation across all of the age groups. And I guess for me, when I look at the proportion in the 25 to 34 and 35 to 44 years where people are often very busy and don't often engage, we still got a lot of people giving us feedback. So it wasn't heavily skewed just towards the age cohort, like I've sometimes experienced in these types of these types of engagements. And ethnicity, again, strongly, quite a large proportion NZ European, but not hugely dissimilar to the 2013 census proportion. So that's all I've got in terms of factual information we got from the engagement round. I'm happy to take questions on the report.
I've just got a question, Rhys, with regard to what happens to these results and how much weight do you give them when you're doing the next round of evaluation and then coming back to the governance group?
Through the chair, so I guess in the next round, when we're now forming up the draft proposal between now and November, so we're taking a number of different, I guess, information streams. We've got the technical information stream from the technical specialists that are developing up the program. We've got what we've learned from the public here, and I guess the richness is in the comments on Social Pinpoint that the technical specialists are able to reflect on what some of those location-specific comments to make sure that when they're scoring the technical criteria in the MCA that they're reflecting, I guess, the nuances within the location-specific areas. We've also got our project reference group that are a set of key stakeholders that have used what we've heard from the community here and scored against the packages, which is also a component of our multi-criteria analysis. So I guess I can't put a percentage of, hey, what we heard from the community here is going to inform our decision making, but I guess it is informing all of the other pieces of the work that will enable the group to bring a proposal through to the steering group and the governance group that is, I guess, has as much information and as much local insight and intelligence as we can.
Kia ora, thanks. So are you satisfied we've got a fairly good and representative sense from the community from this engagement?
Through the chair, I guess we can never be absolutely certain it's fully representative because people self-selected to engage with us. Having said that, the fact that I guess our gender and ethnicities are reflective of the census results, and we reached out to as many people as we did. We got a massive volume of engagement material back compared to some of the engagements that Waka Kotahi have done. I'm reasonably confident that we've certainly got the key issues in the community that we can take into the project.
Yeah, and then I guess the only, in terms of that ethnicity breakdown, the sort of, I guess the largest discrepancy was between the 4% of respondents being Māori versus 9% of Nelson population. So how are you ensuring that we've got adequate Māori engagement on this?
In our multi-criteria analysis, we've engaged with iwi and they've actually scored the packages from a Te Ao Māori point of view. So we've got that level of, I guess, insight into our, which is forming, I guess, part of our technical analysis that we'll be going through to you focused decision makers. So yeah, whilst we might not have got the representation aligned with the census in this community round, we do have specialist iwi representatives that are giving us that greater insight.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you for that. So, I mean, I would assume that, look, we've just got a snippet of the drill down and you'll be doing more drilling down as part of your analysis and understanding of the data.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. And I think you were also forwarded this report on Friday, which goes into more detail than what I've given here.
Yeah. Just, for example, what wasn't in this is just things like where the respondents lived, being online. Did they live in Hamilton or did they live in Nelson? Did they live in Tasman, et cetera, et cetera? So is that the information that you have and you'll be able to, strip out certain things when you analyse the data?
Yes, that's correct. And a couple of those I guess a couple of those pie charts, we have drilled into that greater level of detail to understand whether the way the question was answered is reflective of where the person lives.
Yes, and so question 8 was one of those where you looked at the
Looked in a
4K
bit
or
more
greater
detail.
radius.
Yeah.
So will you also look at, say, for example, you know, even just an over 5K radius? So I know, for example, I live exactly 3.9K. I walked here this morning. I frequently walk here, but Inner Glen is 4.9K, and it's a lot more problematic to get here from there, just that 1K extra difference. So, you know, would that extra K make that extra difference? And the answers would. Stoke people, for example, answer quite differently to some of those questions. And so that will be the sort of thing you'll look at.
Yes, so that's actually why we chose the 4 kilometre mark, because we knew we were right on that cusp between which way people might go. Yeah.
Okay. And then just my other one was just on the, I guess just some of the process or the understanding of the process. There were a lot of notices up, I guess, around the community, asking people to vote on, you know, their preferred option, and there was a suggestion of how they should vote. And I did observe an hour or so of the project reference group. And again, there was that reference to that understanding by some people that the consultation process was actually a vote process. So when you work with the different groups, how do you try and explain? Because, you know, I would have thought it was quite clear it wasn't a vote, but there was still even the understanding within the project reference group, which is probably a little concerning. But then I also saw some quite new faces to the process as well in there. So how do you try and keep that continuity of knowledge and that understanding of the process, I guess?
Through the chair, I guess, first of all, it's not a vote. We were trying to gain community insight. And I guess the key community insight that we gained that we could, you know, probably already predict was, you know, there's some fairly largely entrenched views in the community around certain options, and that we saw, you know, both support for two options and not a third. I guess when Mr. Harlan asked the question, you know, what percentage does this go forward into the decision? You know, there's not a percentage. It helps us form a robust draft proposal that takes account of what we've heard from the community, what we've heard from our stakeholders, and what our technical specialists are suggesting are the right way forward, so that we can bring together all of that to the decision makers to come up with a robust draft proposal. So I'm not 100% certain whether I've answered your question, but yeah, just really want to say it's not a vote.
Yes, no, I was aware. And then just finally, so in this working up the next step that will come forward in a couple of months, you know, will you maybe, you know, engage directly with other parties that you maybe saw didn't necessarily have a voice or haven't had a voice to date, that may then, so for example, and I don't know if you did, but there's a lot of schools on Waimea Road, for example, and the community data, for example, would suggest that that's a priority. And so if you are going to work up options around that and short-term options around that, you know, will you, for example, engage directly with the schools around what impacts they would see if a priority lane package came forward?
Through the chair, the next step is for us to develop a draft proposal, and then once we've developed that and agreed that with steering group, governance group, and brought that back to council, I would then see that we would go and talk with specifically impacted groups at that point, because we'll have a better idea of what we're exactly what the draft proposal is. Now, there's a couple of exceptions there. There's a wee bit more work that that I'm doing with Historic Places. NZ Historic Places. No, they've changed their name.
Yeah.
Heritage New Zealand. Thank you. And also Department of Conservation. So there's a couple of key statutory organisations that we're just doing a wee bit more work with. But apart from that, we're going to land the draft proposal before we do any further, I guess, open public engagement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Reece, thank you for this work. It's really interesting and it's really useful too. There's just one thing that did strike me though when I looked at that feedback that you had on cycling, and that's question 8. And I'm seeing there that from the 1,818 people that responded, if I've read this correctly, that if we look at that split, if we come to the next bit of those, 1,172 lived within 4 kilometres of the CBD and 550 responded from outside the CBD. Do you think that question is reflective of, so what I'm thinking about is proportionally, when I look at all the survey questions, do you think people that lived close to the CBD answered the cycling question and others may not have? Or do you think overall what we've got is a survey that actually has been responded to by a weighting of people that live within 4 kilometres of the CBD as opposed to proportionality around where our population base is?
Through the chair, it certainly looks, when you look at those numbers, that we do have a bias towards people that live within 4 k's of the CBD engaging with this survey.
It does look like that, like quite dramatically. So I'm puzzled by that.
Just to follow up to that question, can you cross-tab these answers with whether somebody says they are a regular cyclist? You did have there it is, type of cyclist, so that you would get a sense, are these confident, frequent cyclists who in the main are responding here, many of whom are living within 4 k's of the central city, so therefore you would expect them to be pushing hard for more services and support. I think that's, yeah.
Through the chair, we have the person's place of work and place of resident tied to each question. So we do have that information that we can drill a bit deeper.
So just follow. So if I'm looking at that, I'm looking at probably 1,800 in total. If we said, well, sorry, see, 1,818, and then if I might not be doing this correctly, and then I subtracted the number that of respondents that live within 4 k of Nelson City that answered this question. I mean, it's not going to be direct correlation. I end up with 650 odd, 646 remaining, and that just doesn't feel quite right. So we might have to look at that list a little bit more just to make sure that we have captured that this question it may not be. Well, that's hard to look past that, isn't it? When you've got 1772 are saying they're living within 4 kilometres. I find that very strongly weighted towards location. But I'll leave you to go away and have a think about that. I just want to make sure that we have, if we've got survey data, I want to make sure that we've actually got it from, a regional response. When I say Nelson region in that sense, and possibly a bit further afield. So where we've got it within the urban bound, the sort of urban boundary kind of response, if we can get it. Because if we we're only getting a handful of people replying who came from Stoke, then I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with this.
Well, it's on if you just go back to question 8 up on the screen. No, it's there. No, that's not it. Space for walking and parking versus walking and cycling is the heading, and then there's 2 charts. and one's got, we have it on, well, it's not page number, we do have it in front
We
of us.
don't have that particular.
Oh, okay.
slide
Reside
set.
more than 4 kilometres out of CBD. And you did mention that in your presentation. So of those people who said their place of residence is more than that 4K circle out, 72% still wanted more space for cycling. I think what the Mayor and others are interested in is where were those, when you go further out, what
Yeah.
does that look like?
And how far out?
And can you go that far out? So you might have Brightwater, Richmond, Stoke. It would be useful. And if that sort of holds up quite strongly, then what it's suggesting to me is it's sending a pretty clear message. But I've got to follow up to that. Because obviously I haven't read all the feedback, when you say want more space for cycling, do you have any richer picture of what does that actually mean?
No, we don't. It was through a chair. It was just a very simple question around trade-off effectively. And I guess just to close that conversation out, I'll make sure that we map the spread of response by location to understand the numbers outside of that kind of nominal 4K or project area, to understand the regional response we've had to the engagement.
I guess perhaps the other thing to get a sense of is I can't off the top of my head think what Nelson's population is by suburb, and getting a sense of whether, what's that sort of 30% of, or just under 30% being in Stoke. It does feel slightly off, but I don't have a sense of how much, and that'd be good to get. I'm sure we've probably got that tucked away somewhere.
I suppose a question I had, I'm just looking back to so the NZTA report. I'm just wondering about, was there any sort of drilling down to the purpose of the travel, or the principal reason people are moving or have made those selections? I'm just thinking for work or for retail or for entertainment or for whatever. Was an option?
Yes, we did ask a question around why people were travelling at the peak hour and how they were travelling. Yeah, so we could, and that, I guess, that richer analysis to help a technical specialist, we can overlay, well, if they were travelling by bike for work, how far were they travelling?
Yeah.
That sort of thing could be teased out from the feedback we got.
Yeah, okay, that'll be.